My name is Willie Roberry with Angelo Publications, and this is the very first episode of DAP Books Podcast. Joined with me today is the founder of Angelo Publications, Sequoia. So, why don't we get started by you telling us a little bit about yourself and about the founding of the publishing firm?
This is super fun for me because I've never been interviewed by an employee before. I feel like, you're going to have to dance around the questions a little bit. What was the question? How did I get started with D'Angelo?
Yeah, well, I've heard this story plenty of times about how D'Angelo started, where it came from. So why don't you tell everyone else?
Yeah, so the publishing company actually started with a magazine. I was in high school. I was 17 years old. I graduated from high school early. And I knew I never wanted to work for anyone else. And it's such a ridiculous story. I've never actually told it on a podcast or an interview, but I knew I never wanted to work for anyone else. And I had just finished reading Richard Branson's book, Losing My Virginity. And I really admired him as an entrepreneur, and he started with a newspaper. And I watched the movie The Devil Wears Prada, and I was always like a bit of a bitch in high school. And I was like, oh, she runs a magazine and she can totally get away with being a major bitch. Maybe I'll just start a magazine. And then that was my first thing I technically started it in high school and then went around to get advertising. And I brought like the first copy of the first magazine I ever did. It's so funny. It's like, I look back on it, and this is, I was, I think, 18 or 19 when I did this. And I look back on it now and I'm like, oh my God, I thought I was so cool.
When you started the magazine, did you have a specific goal in mind? Did you want to achieve something with it?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think I just liked the idea of creating something. And it was a really fun, still I look back on how I put it all together, and it was a really fun period. Like, I would just find people who I felt like were creative people. And I was like, what do you like to do? And one of them was super interested in food. And I was like, why don't you go around to the different restaurants and find the coolest restaurant and write an article about that restaurant and interview the chef? And so little, things like that. I found a really cool photographer, and he became like our staple photographer. His name was Austin Miller, and he shot everything. He shot all of our covers. He shot all of our internal work. We had a fashion section, so we'd find different fashion designers, and he would shoot all of them. And it became super fun. Like, it was a great group that was working on the magazine. And for anybody who's ever been in magazines, it's like not a great business to be in. There's not a lot of, I tend to get in these businesses that are hard to survive financially, but ultra creative. So like, I remember after the third or fourth issue, like, the magazine was dying. Like, literally, I barely had enough money to print the magazine. I'd go around to businesses and like beg them to buy an advertisement. Like, there's a coffee shop I would always sit at and work with my editorial team. And I would, go up to the owner and be like, I'll give you a $500 full page ad. And I probably spent $500 a month on coffee there. So it was like a fair trade. And then there was like this jewelry designer who was friends with my grandfather. And like, I went to him and I said, will you buy an advertisement? He said, what kind of magazine is it? I'm like, it's a youth magazine. And his jewelry pieces were like $20,000 for a ring. He's like, what youth person is going to afford to be able to buy my jewelry? And so it's just like a lot of that kind of hustle. And that's how it started. And the magazine ran for, I think, 2.5 years. Then it became a nightlife magazine because I took all the staff out to party, and I was under 21, so they wouldn't let me in the nightclub. And so I was like, oh, I'll start a nightlife magazine. And then I started a nightlife magazine, and that ran for a few years. And then the first book we ever did was Slim Thugs, How to Survive in a Recession. And I knew Slim. I was friends with Slim. And he was like, you're in magazines. Can you help me publish a book? I was like, sure, I can figure that out. Pretty much all of my career has just been, sure, I can figure that out. And Yeah, so that's kind of how it happened was went over to Slim's house, smoked a blunt with him, like, back in the days when I could smoke weed, and, yeah, and just recorded everything that asked him a million questions, recorded all the answers, wrote it all out. He wanted it to be in Ebonics, so wrote it all out, and I'm like, a little white girl, so I went and found an editor who knew how to edit in Ebonics, and then pulled together the photographs and went to the printer. And that book, we got really lucky on timing. He had done a song with Beyonce, had won an MTV award, and it's funny, but it's actually a really good book. Like if you take the time to look at it, it's got some really cool information in it.
It is
Have you looked at it?
very fun to flip through.
Yeah,
Just
right?
like there are some standout lines whenever you read it that you have to enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hilarious. And we took like tweets. I went through, Twitter was just becoming a thing back then. Twitter, I didn't even really know what Twitter was, but he started using it before most other people did. He was really early on the platform. And so I went back through his tweets and found like the really, really funny, like ridiculous tweets, like really inappropriate. And I put those in the book because I thought that would be really catchy. And then it was ultimately the book was like financial advice, right? So it was like really basic financial advice. Like, don't, don't buy rims that are more expensive than the car. Like super basic shit. But he worded it in a way that was, when he was telling it to me, it was like really witty. And Slim's actually a really funny guy.
Right.
And so I tried to capture that in the book. And then when it came out, Barnes & Noble's called and said, how do we stock this book? And then there was a magazine or a news article about it, and then another one, and then another one, and Huffington Post wrote a piece about it. And then Time Magazine called the office and said, can we interview you? We hear that the rap artist Slim Thug is writing a book on teaching young urban youth how to be financially savvy. I'm like, how did this happen?
And this was over 10 years.
This was
very different time for publishing.
Very different time for publishing, for sure. Very different time for publishing. And that was done in like a traditional method of publishing. And I think, what was that, 2009, 2008, something like that? Yeah. I think I was still a teenager at that point. Might have been 20. But yeah, so that's the book, right? Slim Thug, How to Survive in a Recession. That was the first book I ever published. And then just before I knew it, I had a publishing firm. I mean, you've seen it. Working at the company, you've seen it. People just kind of come out of the woodworks.
It's a very natural progression from, like, even year by year. It's very different than how it was before.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say that anything is, like, forced. I don't think we plan too far ahead. We kind of just go and see where we can take it.
Yeah.
I think our goal as a publishing firm is always to move forward, but we don't actually have, the big dream in mind. Like when you first started the publishing company or publishing magazines, you didn't have that end goal, that dream. You just...
No, I think that's part of the fun, honestly. I think that's part of the creativity and the fun. And it's funny when you listen to a lot of people talk about business. They're like, the vision is the most important thing. And I think our vision is just to be creative. And we're really passionate about, digging in deep with the stories we tell and pulling together the books and all the intricate details of it, like designing the cover and like all the, when we do cool layouts, and that part of it's really, really fun. But I wouldn't say that, I started it with a vision. I had no idea what my vision was. I just took opportunities when they came to me and figured it out. And I feel like that's what, it's been 14 years almost that I've been in publishing. And that's been a huge part of it. And intersecting in my own personal relationships, like a lot of the books come to us through personal relationships. Wiener Schnitzel, JR, I'm friends with his wife and him, and we wingsuit together, and like we're at his house in Aspen, and he's like, asking me about books, and I was like, you should do a book on Wiener Schnitzel. So it just kind of naturally happens. A lot of them do. Feidelman, the book behind you, is the same way. I've known Dean since I was in my early 20s, and I shot with him, and he's kind of this iconic legend in Yosemite Valley, and like to be shot by Dean Feidelman is a huge deal. And then I always wanted to do a book with him. And so it just naturally came about as the firm was more established. We'd worked with people like John Long, and it just kind of flowed. The adventure angle, I think we do. I've always wondered for people who work at the company who aren't really into climbing or adventure, I like throw a lot of adventure shit at you guys.
I mean, as someone who reads all of the books we publish,
Yeah.
I feel like I've picked up on like the lingo and the certain things that an adventurer would need to know. But if you throw me out in the wild with you, I would be.
I don't know about that because we had a launch for Dean Feidelman's book the other day. There was like a bunch of climbers there. And then suddenly, before I know it, you were out at Joshua Tree climbing with these people.
I mean,
like if they knew that you worked with people like John Long on a daily basis and worked with people like Honnold and Renan Oersturk, they're like, those are like the staples and the legends in that community.
It is really incredible to see how the different worlds that you live in intersect because of publishing. Because you come from like mountaineering, extreme sports, you're a base jumper as well. And so we work with people in that field. And those people know other people, such as, I'm thinking of Matt George and John Long.
Yeah.
How that came to be. It was all very natural, and they just came to us because you have those connections and you live in those lives. So it's like book publishing and extreme sports are very different.
Very different
different worlds. But because you're in both, like we get to see as a publishing firm, they come together in such a wonderful way. And I think like that's everyone who's interested in publishing and literature know how it can bring people together. And so being able to witness that firsthand, like from inside a publishing firm, is really amazing.
I feel like we're running out of people though, because like when I think of the intersections between really good literary writing, like great writing, the publishing world, and the adventure world, I'll just say, not just extreme sports. I think of, legend in the surfing world like Matt George. I think of legend in the climbing world like John Long. And I'm like, all right, we got to find some other ones because there's not a lot where those two worlds intersect. And then the rest of it is finding really talented writers like Lucas Roman, right? Who's a very beautiful prosy writer who just so happened to grow up with Brad Gobright, who was this, iconic climber who unfortunately passed away a few years ago now. And that one came about a bit different. Like usually we're pitched stuff, but that one, Matt Blank, who's a base jumping buddy of mine, sent me a Medium article called The Greater Fool that Lucas Roman wrote about his friend Brad Gobright when he died. And I read it, and I remember I like came back to the office and we were all upstairs in the warehouse in Idaho. And I'm like, I want to take this article and turn it into a book. And I think it was like Ashley at the time was like, okay, but we have like a lot of submissions. Do you want to look at the ones that are already done? I'm like, no, this guy's a great writer. And it took 2 years to pull it out of him. Originally, he wanted to start with Aperture Like, which was a collection of short stories to get his feet wet before tackling something like a biography of this kind of iconic.
Because he was just a journalist at the time.
Yeah, it wasn't even like he's a nurse. He wasn't even like a full journalist. He was just writing for fun. Oh. And I came to him with this ultra daunting thing of, I'm going to sign you to a 2-book deal and you're going to do a huge biography that ended up being like 400 pages or something.
Quite hefty.
Of like this iconic climber who's dead now. So you better, do a good job.
Right.
Thank God they were friends.
Right.
Because he was able to, put a lot of heart and love into that book. And we introduced him to John Long, who helped him a little bit answer some questions. And because it's quite daunting taking on a book project like that. But yeah, I mean, I think the adventure world for me personally has been a huge benefit to the publishing side.
Yes. That's an understatement, I think.
I feel like I have access in that world that most people wouldn't have just because of the relationships and the time I've spent in that world and in the mountains. But the literary world, if we were to look at who are the epic legends in the literary world, we look at someone like Stein, right?
Mhm.
Which was quite a feat. Were you there when who came up with that? Was that Elizabeth?
It was Elizabeth who came up with it.
Yeah.
And then you just jumped on it immediately.
Were you there
but
when Elizabeth came up with it, though?
Mhm,
You were.
I
Okay.
believe so.
Yeah.
We had just had the company retreat in the Idaho warehouse.
Yeah.
Very first time all of the team came. And you said, who can we get as one of our next authors?
Yeah. For the
And
hit
of course,
list.
Sequoia's hit list. We just threw out the biggest names we can think of who would be like prolific to have as one of the authors in our repertoire. And yeah, Elizabeth pitched
Was
it.
it Elizabeth? Yeah,
Mhm.
because I remember everyone throughout the thing was really excited about Stein, but I couldn't remember whose idea it originally was. So for those people who don't know, we have this like Sequoia's hit list. I really like stalking people. That's been like a huge part of my career, in a semi-polite way. And that was one of the ones on the hit list. Like, if you look at the hit list, we're doing a book kind of associated with everyone who was on the hit list. Like, we just had Fight Food come out, and we signed Fight Food because I was stalking Conor McGregor, and he's Conor McGregor's private chef. And then, what else do we have that's associated?
Well,
I feel like
you got Stein.
Well, yeah. So I guess the Stein thing is like I stalked him essentially for like quite a few years and sent him daily messages on Instagram and showed up to his book signings. And then eventually, he's just such a genuine person, though. He's so cool that I felt like he was, he's not egotistical in that way where he's gonna like be like, I'm not gonna pay attention to this random girl who keeps stalking me. He was like willing to give people an opportunity,
which is really, I don't want to say it's rare as someone who's young and should be idealistic. I feel like I should have faith that people will give.
No, it's rare.
People
It's definitely rare. I remember I went up to Dane Cook one time, like at a comedy store in LA. And he had just written a book and he had tweeted about writing a book. He's like, this is going to be the greatest book ever, which everyone says that. And I went up to him. I was like, who's your publisher? And he's like, oh, I'm only looking to publish with like Simon & Schuster. It's like, okay, well, would you mind me like taking a look at it and reading it? And he just immediately like turned around and walked away. So there's a lot of people like that who are total, in my opinions, like not willing to give someone an opportunity or not even willing to listen to what they have to say. And Stein is definitely not like that. And one thing I've noticed is the higher up you go, the more they're willing to listen. Like, for example, like, Dane Cook's in the comedy. Do you know who he is?
No.
Yeah. Okay. So he's a comedian, right? So he's in the comedy world, right? So, for example, like Dane Cook's in the comedy world and he's like, not even willing to listen for 2 seconds to what I have to say, just turn around and walk away because he wants one of the big 5 publishers. And then somebody like Dave Chappelle, who I've been nicely stalking for like 3 years now, like Dave was totally open to what I had to say. The first time I met him, he's like, sat with me probably for about 20 minutes while I was talking to him, asking me questions. He's like, how old were you when you started your company? And why would I sign with you? Like, and then made a point to come back and find me later and say, like, I just want to let you know that I really admire what you're doing. And then a month later, like he was like, go make the book and let's see what happens. A month later at his birthday party that I somehow made it to the roof of in New York City, it's like 20 people, like Jon Stewart, Matt Rife, and me there with a book that we made for him. And, but like totally like sat down, looked through the book, was like, this is amazing. Let's talk about this. Completely open to it. And one thing I've noticed is not always the case, but the higher up you go, you hit people like an R.L. Stine, who is the top of his field. His books have literally sold 400 million copies worldwide. He is the epitome of success in the literary world. And he's completely open to hearing about what the opportunity is and giving me a chance, giving us a chance as a firm. And same thing with Chappelle, like the freaking goat of comedy. And he's at least willing, I haven't signed him yet, but he's at least willing to give us a chance, right? And that's one thing that I noticed through the process of us having this hit list and figuring out who do we want to sign next is it seems like there's a willingness to give opportunity to people.
I think a lot of that is specifically with Stein and Chappelle, like those two specifically are older and they have spent their entire lives making themselves to who they are right now.
Yeah.
So I think when you go to them with your little inkling of what could be if they just gave us a chance, like they really see what that could become because they've been there.
Yeah.
Like it's very smart for us, I think, to look at people who have similar stories like yours, who are
become
self-made, who they are.
Yeah, self-made people. And that's the thing is like I've noticed that the people who have created, like you're talking about, created their personas of who they are, and they admire those who have gumption and who, have a dream or a vision. The vision that we've been talking about. Our vision, whether it be to sign the person or to build a company or whatever it may be, and they're able to see that and admire it. And I think that as long as you come with a genuine attitude, right? As long as you come as a humble person with a genuine nature to who you are, then people are willing to listen. And I've found that across the board. I mean, we've been really, really fortunate to work with some incredible people. And, a huge part of it is just to be genuine and honest. Like, I'm not coming to them and being like, I'm the biggest publisher in the world, and if you sign with me, you'll make millions, because that's not true. Mm-hmm. And we're a small company, and we've got a little bit of grit, and that's about it. We don't have like huge investors. We don't have no investors. We're like trying to make it on our own, Mm-hmm. And I think as long as you show that genuine nature to people, they're willing to listen.
Right.
That's
something we should also talk about. Because for certain people, it does help that we're small and self-made and that we're going after dreams that are probably too big to be realistic. But
what are you talking about, Willie? We got R.L. Stein. We were on stage with Gloria Steinem. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. We got big dreams we're making happen.
Exactly. But they're probably bigger than what a small company would ever imagine. Yeah. So...
Why?
I think we should bring out.
Well, why? Why do we have such big dreams?
They don't have the same type of attitude as you do, I think.
Yeah.
But I mean,
because I feel like it ties back to adventuring, right?
Right.
So, like, base jumping is a perfect example. Most people probably wouldn't go and jump off a bridge or an antenna or a building or a cliff or whatever with a parachute. Most people probably wouldn't have the opportunity to go climb in the Himalayas or live that style of life. And I've been, fortunate in the path that my life has taken. But those extreme activities teach you a lot about life, teach you a lot about your fear, teach you a lot about your comfort zone, teach you a lot about how important it is to take risks. And I try to instill that in the company's motto as well. And I mean, you're a firsthand witness. It's funny because, like, other than my husband, the team probably knows me better than anyone because you guys get to witness it every day, all the time. We take massive fucking risks. I mean, we were almost in bankruptcy like a year ago. And we like pulled ourselves out of it somehow.
Cold December, and now we're sitting here.
And so, like, I think that's to answer your question, the reason we have such big dreams, the reason I think as a company and as a person, the reason that I strive for what most people would consider impossible feats is because I know they can be done. I don't have that no. I don't have that word no, and I don't have that limit, and I don't have that because I grew up in a way and exposed myself to situations, to people, to cultures that taught me valuable lessons about taking risk and the importance of it, and like stepping out of that comfort zone, you know?
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's, something you see through a lot of the successful people who have made themselves. Just the commonality between you all. It's it's known within the publishing industry that indie pubs are scrappy.
That's a good way to put it.
And
Yep.
we've been talking a lot about like the benefits of that because like you said, if you go to someone with a genuine interest at heart and only good intentions and honesty, they'll be more likely to listen. But there are people who will turn you down just because you're smaller. So can you tell us about the challenges of being a small publisher?
We've never paid advances, so it almost makes it that much harder to try to sign anybody huge, right? And we work very differently. Like each contract is designed very, very differently. We have some books that we bring in ghostwriters and we start it from scratch. I mean, like I was saying with Slim Thug's book, we sat down and hit record and we created the book from scratch. And then we have some books that, the writer has it completely laid out and they bring it to us. Most of the time we have to redo the layout, but like they're a fully packaged finished product and we just kind of have to run it through a loose line of editing. And so every single book is vastly different and every single contract is vastly different. And I didn't start it intentionally as this form of publishing. We call it modernized publishing. Some people call it hybrid publishing. But no, the first few books that I did were done in a traditional format where the author covers nothing. They just hand in the material and it's finished. Or in Slim's case, we create the material. The publisher covers all the expenses. And then the book comes out, the author gets, little to no percentage of royalties off of it. And that's a traditional form of publishing. And then what happened was as time went on, I would have authors get frustrated with things like, we have creative control. If we're the one paying the bills, we have creative control. So I remember it was a book we were doing called The Successful CFO, and the author didn't like the cover that I put on the book. And I was like, well, it's my money. If you don't like the cover, you can pay for it. And he was like, can I? Because I will pay for it if I get to choose my own cover. And so then I was like, oh, okay. So we could actually create different types of contracts where if they wanted creative control, provided it wasn't the shittiest cover ever, we could be a little more lenient if they're willing to cover the expenses. And it allowed us to kind of open up this new form of what was called modernized publishing. Remember, this is like 14 years ago. It's before hybrid existed. It's, right when self-publishing was just coming out. Amazon wasn't even really a thing, So it's, it's been very interesting watching publishing as a whole. The Big Five had stayed consistently the Big Five throughout this entire time. How they're all surviving, I still question. I mean, I remember being at the ALA, the library conference, the ALA conference in DC, and like being next to the Hachette station, and Hachette was like, the person working there was like, yeah, James Patterson keeps our bills paid. Without him, we this $100 million company would be under. So it's been interesting watching just, from a small publishing company perspective, not only the Big Five and how they've been dealing with the publishing world and the changes that happen. Some of them have created their own hybrid imprints, but also the hybrid publishers that pop up left and right. And being an outsider on that has been interesting. Then being an insider on that has been interesting by attending some of the conferences and book fairs and hearing what they have to say. But, I have never been one to follow trends. Like, I'm not going to do something just because the other publishers are doing it. If anything, I say we do our own thing. We just kind of forge our own path. And if we notice that the industry is going a particular way, we might be like, if romance is a huge thing, right? So like romance becomes a massive thing in the publishing world in the last 2 or 3 years, then we might look at doing a romance book, which we did. And we published a few, Planted in Christmas being one, Love Against the Autumn Sky being another for Willa Friedrich.
My Brother's Best Friend.
My Brother's Best Friend being another. Yeah. So we'll look at titles that we might not necessarily have looked at otherwise. So I'll take trends from the publishing industry and say, okay, we can play with that a little bit. But it's not like we're turning all of our focus of every single book towards romance. Like that, we're kind of forging our own way in that regard.
Right. And I feel like that is another thing that sets us apart from other publishers, is that we don't have one genre that we stick to. Like you said from the very beginning, you just chase creativity and powerful stories. Like we just want to help authors create the best product they can and like help their creative vision come to life. And that's not going to change.
Yeah.
So I think that's...
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting. Like, I feel like we're on a whole new adventure now because we just opened our LA office this last year. And, you know, you were in Idaho before and now so welcome to Los Angeles. Willie moves to Los Angeles and suddenly within 2 months she's hosting a podcast. It's very LA of you, Wills. But yeah, I'm really excited about like this next adventure with the LA office. And I've spent the last 10 years, I have a place here. I've spent a lot of time here. There's parts of LA that I like. But I feel like it's a fun adventure to see where the firm's going. And we have such a cool team. Like the publishing firm has such an amazing team that I feel like we've got good things in the future.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see where it goes. Like I said, it changes year by year, month by month sometimes.
Literally month by month.
And so,
it's okay. I get you guys out of your comfort zone. I'll walk into the office and be like, and we're doing this now.
Yeah, the idea for the podcast was not even 4 days ago.
Yep.
And here we are.
And we're doing a podcast. Willie, you're going to host it. Let's see how you do. Yeah. I mean, I think that we've learned in this last year, we've learned a lot about the importance of things like our relationship with our authors. Like prior to Alma being a part of the team, so Alma handles our author relations, and prior to her being part of the team, like I'd go like months without talking to an author, and then they'd call me and be like, what's going on? You haven't called me. Because it's such an intimate relationship during the actual publishing process. But after the book comes out, I'd go a while without talking to them. And now like Alma's whole job is keeping that relationship with the authors, which is like a full-time job. But I've noticed such an impact with having her be a part of the team in that way.
And I guess that's another pro of being a smaller team, is that we can maintain these close relationships with our authors.
Yeah.
All of us. And that's the entire reason we wanted to start this podcast too.
Highlight some of the authors, talk to some of the authors. I mean, get a behind the scenes look at some of the authors. I mean, so when a book comes out, obviously we have a podcast list of who we want to hit, who we want the author to do interviews with. But there's a lot of questions on there that I feel like don't get asked about the creation of the book and how the book came to be. And I felt like this was a really good opportunity for that. And since your last eyes on the book before it goes out to trade distribution, like Willie's whole job is the final eyes before it goes to trade. And so she, has to very diligently read every single book, and she usually knows the author quite well by then. So I'm like, she's the perfect one. And she's living in LA now. She's the perfect one to host the podcast. So good job, Wills.
Well, wouldn't be here without you.
First episode. It's done. You won't get fired. We'll be good. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a huge part of it, is like the team philosophy. That was always a big part of it for me, is like, how do I make sure that Barbara Cochran actually said it best. She's like this, entrepreneur, real estate mogul in New York. And she's on that TV show Shark Tank. But she says all the time, your team doesn't work for you, you work for your team. So making sure that you guys are happy, that you guys are fed, that you guys are well taken care of.
Well fed at Angelo Publications.
Come for the meal plan, not the salary. Yeah. So like that was a huge philosophy for me that I tried to incorporate, is like, Alma was really unhappy in Idaho. It was cold. It was miserable. So I was like, okay, do you want to move to LA? And then you became unhappy in Idaho. Apparently everyone just wanted to move to LA. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's the thing that sets us apart from any other publisher, is the unique relationship we have with each other, that we have with our books, our passion for our books, and the unique relationship we have with our authors. And that's something you don't find every day, that passion and that integrity and that genuine love for what you do.
Thank you all for watching. This has been DAP Books Podcast with Angelo Publications. Be sure to follow along on our socials. It's DAP Book Pod at Instagram and Angelo Publications on all platforms. Tune in for our next interview with John Long, which will be up later.
You killed it right up until the last line. That's good. I really like that. Can we leave that in, Denisha? That's kind of cute.